What's up everyone? I'm back with another video this week. It's the holidays and I wasn't going to film this week actually. By the way, happy holidays to everyone. I hope you had a great break, good Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. New Year's is coming up. Happy New Year's. Today's New Year's Eve. Anyways, I did want to film a video this week because next week I'm actually going to be on a vacation, so I won't be posting a video that week. Or maybe I'll vlog my vacation and you guys will see some of my hobbies because it's going to be like a skiing trip and a rock climbing trip. And yeah, let's just get started with this video. So just a fair warning, there are going to be spoilers in this video to the murder mystery story, and this video is going to be quite emotionally intense. So if you can't handle a tragic story, I guess maybe don't watch this video. This video is going to be covering the storyline of Natalie Steel from the murder mystery story. Without further ado, let's get started. First and foremost, she was involved with a man named Richard Snow. Richard Snow, as some of you might have figured out if you played Murder Mystery 1, he was actually part of a criminal group called the Triad of London. He was living a double life. On one hand, he was this loving boyfriend, and on the other hand, he was a pretty dark, intense criminal. But the thing about Richard Snow is he always had good intentions. It's more of just the wrong place at the wrong time kind of deal. He wanted to hide the fact that he had a romantic involvement with Natalie Steel because she was in law enforcement. If the Triad or Nikita figured out about this relationship, they would A, kill Snow, B, kill Natalie, C, kill both of them, or D, use Natalie and manipulate her via Richard Snow. In the case of Nikita, he's not really a bloodthirsty guy, so he would likely just manipulate Natalie and use Richard to do so. And this probably would have led to a much more powerful Triad unit in London, but Richard did a good job of hiding it, and he was able to protect Natalie from the threats of the Triad. We have to ask the question of why did Richard disappear from Natalie's life? And we kind of answered it. He kind of wanted to protect her from the Triad. Richard also understood that you can't really hide a double life forever. He was smart enough to leave before it got to the point that Natalie figured out he was someone else. He actually wanted to marry her, but things just got really bad. It got really serious with the creation of Entropy, or the attempted creation of Entropy. That was a really big project. He was getting paid tons of money. Things were starting to become sketchy, and Natalie was asking him questions for which he had to consistently lie. So Richard got out of that relationship and vanished from her life. It goes without saying, like, sometimes the things you have to do are the hardest things to do. And that's really a life lesson that I kind of try to inscribe into murder mystery, as well as a couple others that I'll talk about later. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about Natalie Steel and her family life, specifically her father, Jack Steel. Jack Steel was an investigator for the London police, just like Alex, just like Natalie, and also like Jonathan, and we're going to talk about him in a second here. Jack Steel, he actually shared a very similar fate to Alex Morgan as well. There's a lot of strange ironies in this story, and this is one of them. Jack Steel was actually a corrupt officer. When you think of the Steel family, you think justice, kindness, honor, and this kind of thing, but Jonathan and Natalie's father was actually a corrupt police officer. But it's not quite how you think it would be, because he was almost forced into the corruption. Basically what happened is he joined a police force that wasn't very clean, and they were operating with a lot of drugs and getting a lot of money for it. When Jack figured this out, he wanted to actually fight it and expose them. Then he was threatened with death, and so he had to make a choice. Either he was going to leave this world and try to fight this, but he was all alone, or he was going to pretty much fold, and Jack folded. So he became part of the corrupt police unit, and he didn't like any of it ever, but he didn't participate. He was gonna die. ultimately that is how it ended. He did die anyways. There were really smart plays that he did to get out of certain things, and he survived for a very long time in this corrupt task force, even though his life was on the line constantly. But the thing is that the public and the Steel family don't actually know that this happened to him. He is just gone, and no one knew he was part of any kind of corruption, willingly or unwillingly. It just wasn't known. Natalie now has Richard gone. He vanished. Her father vanished. And then obviously you guys know Jonathan vanished as well. So Natalie has lost a lot in her life. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Jonathan Steel and his backstory. If you recall, in Murder Mystery 2, Natalie and Jonathan message a little bit, and their father comes up very briefly, and we don't really know anything about his father or why Jonathan's doing what he's doing, but I'm here to tell you why. Jonathan and Natalie both wanted to join the police force pretty much to figure out what happened to their dad. After a really long time of investigating, Jonathan couldn't figure it out. As you can imagine, he couldn't figure it out because it was covered up by the police force. And he figured out that it's possible something sketchy happened, but he didn't really figure out that it was the police force that was in fact sketchy. So he quit his job as an investigator because this loss kind of destroyed him, and he really wanted to figure out what happened to his father, and he never did. He later pursued investigation anyways, because that was his primary skill, and he became a private investigator. And the life of a private investigator is not so lucrative, because there aren't that many times where you pick up the phone and someone's offering to pay you a ton of money to investigate a case. But this was the fact in Los Angeles. He went out to LA. If you played Murder Mystery 2, you know how that story went. And basically, he was paid a lot of money to investigate the disappearance of Rich Rivera. If you want to know more about that story, you should probably play Murder Mystery 2. I don't want to dive too far into that because that kind of isn't really what this video is about, so I'm going to keep talking about Natalie Steel. Basically, the thing you need to know is that all the people close to her, arguably all the people close to her in her life, have actually just disappeared, all sharing a very similar fate. Now we have a point in Natalie's life where 3 people really close to her have just disappeared, and she wants to fight it. She knows her brother went to Hong Kong. She knows that something bad happened, so she decides to go looking for him, which is an awesome thing to do. But as you know, characters in my story that go to Hong Kong, it doesn't turn out well for them. But luckily enough, Natalie actually returned from Hong Kong and didn't go far enough in Hong Kong to meet the same fate as many other characters met. Natalie was never able to deduce that Zato was in fact the Triad's secret cancerous weapon, but she knew something was really troubling about Zato because she actually got a package seemingly from John that said beware of Zato. And this has certainly a lot of mystery to it, and more of it will be talked about in another video because I can't actually talk about that without giving you future spoilers. Once Natalie saw the horrors in Hong Kong and the depth of this Triad crime unit, she pretty much knew that she wasn't going to find a brother. As a result, she returned home and eventually got back to her normal life. Moving on from something like that is very challenging. Most people would break apart. She's a pretty strong character for having that ability to move on from all of these losses. We're at the point where Natalie returns back to London without finding her brother, basically without finding much of anything other than the atrocities of the Triad. So once she returns home, she comes across a young genius detective named Alex Morgan. She comes across this actually in the media because he is currently under huge suspicion for murder. There's a dead, bloody corpse in his apartment, and so she decides she'd look into the case. She was able to help him, and they figured out that someone tried to frame him. You will, in fact, find who framed Alex Morgan. It's none other than Ethan Rinn, aka Shade. He works for the Triad underneath Nikita and Paul Volkov. After they crack the case with Ethan Lynn, a new criminal is in their sights, and we know him as Nikita Volkov. Both of them, Alex Morgan and Natalie Steel, go on this chase and end up capturing one of the brothers, but they don't know there's two of them. And now let's talk about the final moments and the moments preceding the asylum. Before entering the asylum, Natalie Steel was adamant that she would take the team in. And this is because she thought she would encounter Richard Snow. And she did. Her emotions really messed with her logical thinking. What did she expect to happen? It's not going to be a happily ever after story with Richard and Natalie. It can't be. One of them's a detective, one of them is in the Triad. That just doesn't work. But unfortunately, her emotional attachment to him was really messing with her logical thinking. Alex Morgan also was emotionally invested. He was actually emotionally invested into Natalie. And so he was lacking logical thinking as well. And so emotions basically really messed up this entire situation. Once Natalie and the team entered the asylum, communication to the outside world was gone because there was a signal jam and there was a Faraday cage surrounding the main room. One of the big questions about this scene is what happened with Richard and Natalie? What took place? The fact of the matter is Natalie and Richard did meet, and both of them just froze. Everyone on the team was dead except Natalie. I'm trying to imagine how this would feel, but I just can't. Picture entering a dark, maze-like building that just sends chills up your spine. As you go in, the people you go in with are just shot and killed right in front of you. And there are like echoes of gunshots just shattering ears. And there's blood on the walls, there's blood on the floor, there's blood on you probably. And then out of the darkness, a face emerges, right? And it's none other than your long lost love. He's sweating, he's got blood on his clothing, he's crying. It's a hell of an emotional scene. And I'm just trying to think, what would that actually feel like, right? You can't help but think your life is over, right? It's like the flood of emotions is just so strong at this point. You're just in shock. And just picture how Richard felt. As soon as he saw Natalie, he knew she was dead. He knew that she was dead. And he knew that that was the last thing Natalie would see. His face and all the dead officers around them. That's the last thing Richard wanted. Richard just wanted Natalie to be safe, which is why he left her and kept her hidden so well from the Triad. And of course, as fate will have it, life brought these two people back together, but in the most unfortunate of circumstances. The most tragic possible way. And the only thing she could even say was, Richard, is that you? And right at that moment, Paul Volkov killed Natalie and then killed Richard. The last thing Natalie saw was her love, but it was in such an extremely violent setting. And the last thing Richard saw was the love of his life dying right in front of him in an extremely violent way as well. I always believe in this weird, funny, coincidental thing that life has its way of tying people back together. But in this case, when Natalie and Richard's paths crossed once again, it also ended their paths completely. They were severed from this world as soon as life connected them back together. So let's talk about maybe some philosophical concepts here now. A bittersweet ending to Natalie's story would have been if she survived that encounter, captured the tribe, captured Snow, she got some closure from Richard, all of this kind of thing, and then she lived a bright, happy future life with Alex Morgan. Basically, the life lesson in Natalie's story is that relationships and people in your life, they don't last forever. In fact, nothing in life lasts forever. The important thing to take away from this is that you have to be your own best friend, because at any moment, things can be stripped away from you. You know, people can be taken away, they can choose to leave, things can be taken away, all kinds of things can happen, but at the end of the day, if you're not your own biggest fan, it's going to be a problem, because everything else is pretty temporary in your life. The one thing you have forever is you. That's the idea behind Natalie's narrative. There's a pretty big irony in Natalie's story, because she actually left Hong Kong pretty much in fear. She saw where this dark path was going, and she had the foresight to turn around and leave, even though it meant leaving her brother behind forever. The irony is that she came back to London and pretty much met the same dark path. So this brings me to another point. In general, you have to be really careful who you spend your time with. People will often hide who they really are. And that's another theme in murder mystery. You know, every character has their secrets, some bigger, some smaller, but every character is not really who they say they are. And I think that's a pretty accurate representation of life in general. It's not to say you shouldn't trust anyone, but I guess what I'm saying is, if we struggle to know ourselves, how do we expect to know anyone else? And you can really see that in the story, because every character has some twisted side of them that doesn't come out until later on. Overall, Natalie's narrative embodies loss. So loss is a common theme in murder mystery. However, I would say Natalie's loss was probably the most extreme. You know, one could argue Alex Morgan lost a lot as well. He lost a partner and he lost himself, really. But with Natalie, it was just loss after loss after loss, and then she actually completely lost her life. Anyways, I think that wraps up the video. I got a little bit philosophical towards the end there, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope this gave you some insights into Murder Mystery 1. Like I said, next week I'm going on a vacation, so I won't be posting a video, but that's why I posted one today on the holidays. And with that being said, Happy New Year's, everyone, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.